In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about error handlers. So you don't always want your error that you experience in VBA to open up the actual code window. That's a way that you could accidentally give your users a backdoor into your direct code and give them the chance to mess something up in the code or to try to fix something and actually make it worse. And so instead, we build error handlers, which let the user typically know, hey, you did experience an error and you should probably ask somebody about this, but it does not open up the code window like a VBA error would usually do. So I've got some examples of this here of what your error handlers might look like. I'd use the two most common error handlers, which are resume next and GoTo. So to break this down for you, we'll look up at this top section first. And this, we've created two variables, A and B. They're both a double type variable, which is going to be a number. And then down here, we've set A equal to 9, and then B equal to 6 divided by 0. Now this should throw an error because we can't divide by 0, so we should be expecting an error on this line. And then just to give us another line after this to test out the code, we're going to reset A equal to 3. So you'll notice this is the same across all of these three subs that I have here. We have creating our variables and then setting our variables with an intentional error. Creating variables, setting variables with an intentional error, and setting variables with an intentional error down here as well. The difference is this top sub right here has no error handling in it. So when we run this, it should go ahead and break into the back door of our code like it would normally. This middle subroutine uses onError resume next, which we'll talk about, and the third subroutine uses onError GoTo example line, which we'll talk about. So starting up with this code, I'm going to go ahead and press F8 to step into this and walk through it. So first we've set A equal to 9. Now we're setting B equal to 6 divided by 0. So when I press F8 again, we get an error. And this says runtime error. The error is 11. We've tried to divide by 0. So when we click debug, we can see right here, this is the line that's giving us an error. And that's what we expect. So if I actually end this really quick and I go back to Excel and I click on macros and I run that subroutine, which was called intentional error, and I click run, it'll go ahead and break into the back end of the code for me. And this is what we don't want to do. We don't want to provide the users access to our code, direct access to the code. And it's often VBA can be overwhelming for people who haven't seen it before. And so we don't want this window to pop up for people. So we're going to go ahead and click end. Now, if I jump back to my code, this time we'll look in this particular subroutine, which is an example of onError resume next. So these four words, if you place them at the top of your subroutine, they tell VBA, if you do experience an error, I want you to just ignore that line. Just jump to the next line and keep going. Don't break into the code. Don't pop up any errors. Just keep moving forward like you would normally. This is a little bit risky to use for obvious reasons. You usually want to know when you have an error. You usually do want to be alerted that an error was experienced, but sometimes you may have an error that you're aware of that you haven't fixed yet, or there may be unique cases where this is applicable. So it is a fairly common tool to address errors. So if I press F8 to step into this, we'll see I've hit this onError resume next line, so everything after this should just skip errors that we experience. So we're going to set A equal to 9. Next, we're going to set B equal to 6 divided by 0, which we know we can't do. And see, we've skipped past this line. We haven't thrown an error message. We're not aware that something's gone wrong. We'll press F8 one more time, and we've ended our subroutine without knowing that we have an error. If I go back into my code, and I go to macros, and I run my resume next public subroutine, it's going to run and it's not going to throw an error. It's not going to break us into the back of the database at all. So I'll click run, and we can see nothing happens. I don't get an error message. The code runs all the way through. It just ignored this error that we had. Now, typically, like we mentioned, you don't necessarily just want to ignore your errors. It's typically important to know that an error was experienced at some point. So instead, we can use onError GoTo. And this is a way of identifying an error that we experienced without actually breaking into the back end of the code. So we type this line up here, onError GoTo example line, And you can change this term to be whatever you want it to be, whatever you plan on calling your section. And then essentially we build this section further down in our code. Usually at the end of your code, you'll type example line or whatever you named it with a colon. And this tells VBA this is essentially a label. And we can jump to this label using GoTo this example line like we have here. So now we've told VBA on an error, when you experience an error, I want you to go to this label line, which we created down here. And all that we built here is a little message box that says, hey, we experienced an error when we were running the code. And there are times where you could actually get a little bit more specific with this. You could build a couple different of these on-error go-tos. You could use them a couple different places in your code where you might experience different errors and then provide a different message box to the user. But in our case, we're going to run through this code. We put this exit subline to make sure that if our code runs successfully, if we didn't have an error here, if we commented this line out, for example, when it runs through, it's going to exit the sub before it starts hitting any of these labels and displaying messages that it shouldn't display. So as a precaution, we go ahead and tell it to exit sub at the end of what our actual code is. But in our purposes, if we run through this, we should see it jump to our labeled line down here. So I'm going to click into this code. I'll press F8 to enter. Now we've gone ahead and told the system, this is what I want you to do when you have an error, when you experience an error. Here's our error line. So when I press F8, we see it jumps down to our example line here. We experience the error. It's going to jump past everything else, and it's going to throw this message box up for us. And we see an error was experienced during the code. We'll hit OK. And now it's just going to go ahead and end the subroutine without continuing to run. So again, if I go back to my Excel code here, and I go to macros, and click on the GoTo location macro and say run, it throws this error message, we click OK, and at no point does it open up the VBA window. So these are two of the most common ways to address errors in your VBA code. My preference is to use the go to a certain location, and that way we let the user know they did experience an error, but we're not breaking into the back end of our code and showing them this VBA window at all. So this is definitely something to keep in mind as you're building your code, and yeah, you definitely need to have some sort of error handling built in. So resume next and go to location are both great tools to have for that.